with Medicare, talk to a retiree who has been on Medicare for, say, like 5 years, and has had some illnesses. They will tell you how incredibly valuable the program is. Okay, it is a safety net program that almost every American will eventually rely on, if hopefully they live to 65 or so. And Medicare, what it does is it provides most retirees with hospital and also medical coverage for doctor's visits, x-rays and tests, outpatient procedures. It essentially replaces your employer-provided health coverage that you've had, in the time you've been working. It's a benefit that you've been paying into, like Social Security. You see it coming out of your pay stubs. You see that you've been paying into Medicare. And in return, once you retire and once you qualify for Medicare in your 60s, the government basically takes over as your provider, like your Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna. It negotiates payments to your healthcare providers. It pays most of your medical bills. So if you go to the hospital, the hospital bills Medicare. Okay, and it covers most of your medical bills, but not all. Okay, so it's a guaranteed set of benefits that are so important to people on fixed incomes in retirement. Now, the GOP plan would basically eliminate the guaranteed set of benefits. Costs would vary. They want to give out subsidies, right, similar to a voucher plan. The government pays part of your premium with a subsidy, and retirees enter the private market to buy their insurance. The problem with that, it sounds okay on the surface. The problem with that is that costs would fluctuate. And, depending on where you live, costs could go up. They could be similar to what we know now. And when premiums and medical costs go way up, as we've seen in America for the last, 3 or 4 decades, what then for retirees? These are people on fixed incomes. They're going to have to dip deeper into their own pockets. And, the fear is that many would go broke. So the important thing to remember here, though, is that there is no mandate to revamp Medicare. This isn't something that came up in the presidential election. Donald Trump actually promised to leave it alone. So hopefully the GOP will leave it alone or just work on a different method, to rein in spending because, this is something Americans have been paying into. They have a right to fight for the best set of benefits possible. Medicare has come up for the GOP because kind of hand in hand with their plan to repeal and hopefully replace, they talk about Obamacare, which, depending on where you stand, they just need a replacement. I mean, it's, if you're for repeal, for not repealing it, they're going to repeal it. I mean, they're going to. There's no question in my mind that they're going to do that. But they got to replace it with something pretty darn good because millions of Americans are tied into, Obamacare. But Medicare would be something separate that they would probably go after, later. And that would be terrible. And of course, one of the things I worry about is that many Americans, people my age, people in their 20s and 30s, are unaware of how important Medicare is and how it would affect them because they don't have experience dealing with it. I had experience at a young age because my father relied on it, and he retired when I was in my 20s, and I handled a lot of his medical affairs. And I got a real working knowledge of how important the program is. And so, my fear is that, too many are unaware of what, revamping Medicare would do to them in 10, 20, 40 years. The problem is that they do need to find ways to rein in spending. Cutting back on fraud would be a great one, right? I know they're working on that all the time because there are people that game the system no matter what you have. But, I think probably Democrats would say, people have to pay more for it or something like that, to find a way to keep it. And, the GOP is going to be against, raising taxes and, and you've got some budget hawks like Paul Ryan. They want to find a way to do it without increasing taxes and things like that. I think there can be some middle ground. But the important thing I'm going to go back to is that this isn't something that people want. Nobody's, you do have a segment of the population that's saying Obamacare is terrible. You don't have that with Medicare. Nobody is saying, oh, Medicare is a mess. It needs to be reworked. No, because it works. That's the most important thing to remember about Medicare. It works. It is valuable. It is not necessarily cheap all the time because it doesn't cover, everything. It covers like 80% of your medical visits. Hospital stays, after a pretty high deductible, it covers 100%, but that's if you're only in the hospital for, 1 to 60 days, which if you're older and you have some serious medical issues, maybe you're hospitalized for 3 months or something like that, it can get expensive. You need to pair it with a supplemental policy. But talk to retirees. They will tell you that to have that safety net, that it is so valuable, and to know that they have a guaranteed set of benefits when they're on a fixed income and can't afford, don't have a lot of variables they can work with. And that's what Republicans need to understand, is that it works, and they need to find a way to keep it working. Of course, people don't have kids in America like we used to, so there aren't as many people paying into Medicare, like my parents had 7 kids, right? I mean, I don't have any. So that's, people that are not paying into Medicare now to support retirees, and so all those things, those are problems, and there are issues. But the main thing to remember is that this is an incredibly valuable asset and a very, incredibly valuable program for Americans who are middle class and working class. Paul Ryan is a savvy guy, right? I mean, he knows what he's doing on this stuff, and under his plan, these changes would affect people who are currently like 55 and younger. So if you're 55 or older, Medicare wouldn't change for you. It would be the plan that my dad had and the plan that people have now. So there would probably be less resistance to the change. And this is where, people being naive about the benefits of Medicare kind of plays into the GOP's hands, because if you're under 55, there's a good chance you don't understand Medicare and how valuable it is. So even though the AARP is opposed to this, they see skyrocketing costs for retirees in the future. They know it would be a terrible thing. But you wouldn't have the resistance from people who are 65, 70 years old today, right? Because the program doesn't change for them. So it's only the younger generations that would get hit by this.
Hey, Marlen, you have some good points. My question, 2 questions. Number one would be, why weren't we figuring this out earlier? 20, 30, maybe even 40 years ago. And I say that from the perspective of having worked in the financial side of the medical field for 19 years, up until this past June. Number 2, I guess, what if this program what if Medicare just didn't involve the government? What would it look like under a set of circumstances that just didn't involve the government, in which case the taxpayer, for one, the taxpayer wouldn't be the one left on the hook.
Here's a problem with privatizing Medicare, or private health insurance. Private health insurance is in the business of making money. It is not in the business of taking care of its clients or customers. It is in the business of making money. So the first thing that private health insurers try to do is to figure out how not to pay for things. The best customer / client of a private health insurance company is someone like me. I pay premiums every 2 weeks, which costs me about $2,600 a year. I don't go to the doctor, and in their minds, hopefully, I have a massive heart attack or stroke and just drop dead and never use their service, but pay premiums on a regular basis. Here's the other thing that's problematic with using private health insurance as opposed to Medicare. Medicare increases have been pretty steady but slow, but low rates of increase. When it comes to private health insurance, they can jack up the price anytime they want. You know, this year, I'll give you the progression. When I first started paying for health insurance 16 years ago, it was $40 every 2 weeks. Now it's $100 every 2 weeks. Do you think retirees can actually afford that? I don't think so. Especially that kind of increase, it increased by 150% in 15 years. So, privatizing health insurance and getting rid of Medicare is moronic when it comes to people who actually use it, which are retirees. For them, it will be moronic. For private health insurance companies, it'll be a lovely windfall for them. They'll make a lot of money off you people. And then try to figure out how not to pay.
I think you bring up a lot of really good points. Under Obamacare, though, there was a tax put in play to save Medicare. So it was supposed to be basically out of money, I think, in 2017, and it's prolonged it to 2026. So therefore, if we get rid of Obamacare, as they want to do, then there's jeopardy of that going away as well. They've also put in play a lot of fraud prevention measures and recouping fraud. So now when there is a fraudulent thing that's discovered, the money goes back into the Medicare pot. So I can't remember, but I think it was like 700 million or 700 billion or something, some big number, and I think it was 700 something. That's actually been put back into Medicare based on cracking down on some of these fraudulent claims. So, I don't think a voucher system would work because, like you mentioned, there's a lot of people who wouldn't be able to handle that extra cost. Because it's not like you can just go out and get a second job or something. A lot of these people aren't capable of doing that. So, I don't think that's been thought through well enough. Because when you think about it, like a lot of these people, if they had to go into some system like that, they would go broke. They would probably have to claim bankruptcy, which then the government would pay for that. Or they would have to take out a mortgage on their home, which essentially, there would be all this debt occurred. So I really don't think that is the best way to go. Definitely look into fraud prevention and look into cost-saving measures. But somebody who, I'm on the preventative side, I'm a dietitian, so I see that a lot of times many issues are not addressed in a costly manner. I mean, don't just put them on a pill, just put them on this, just put them on that. And then you have people on, 20 medications, and then, they end up taking something, and then they end up taking something else to combat the side effects of the first one, and it's just a mess. So I think that more preventative measures need to be put into play, more help. A lot of it is nutrition, especially elderly people, if they can't cook or something like that. A lot of times they go without eating. A lot of times they end up, going without eating because they can't afford their medicine. So, like, they save up the money to pay for the medicine, but then they don't have any food. And it's like, we learned that back in Africa, because when, they sent over all this medication to help out with HIV, and it wasn't working. And so the doctor started wondering, like, well, why is this not working? It's working everywhere else, it's not working here. And when he started looking into it, he found out that the people weren't eating. You have to be nutritionally sound in order for the medications to work. And so that's what we see in our elderly population. Then we deal with, like, dehydration because they're older and they don't sense things like that, so then you're dealing with that. And a lot of times they don't eat. I mean, it's just, elderly population is a very difficult one to deal with, nutritionally, just because they don't have a sense to eat, or they can't afford to eat, or, they have trouble getting out of their homes to get to the store to get food or whatever. So, there's so many things that we could do nutritionally that would probably help prevent a lot of these problems. Especially like dehydration. That's something that we could do to try to get them hydrated appropriately so they don't wind up in ERs based on being dehydrated and they stay overnight or stay a couple days, or they're malnourished or something like that. And if you're considered malnourished, then you stay for extra time. So I think if they had something a little bit better, like maybe even like home health, that would drive down the cost, especially putting these people in hospitals or putting them the emergency room. That's where a lot of the cost has occurred. So I think there's a lot of really good ideas to try to help, but they're just not done. In my field, we're not paid for unless they're diabetic, or unless they're in renal failure or something like that, which like, we should try to get to them before they end up in that situation. But their medications and stuff like that are paid for immediately, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense the way the system is set up. One additional thing I thought of and wanted to add on to that is, if we went to somewhat of a more home health approach than putting them in hospitals, it would drive down the cost as well. Because a lot of times when elderly people end up in hospitals, then they end up with MRSA or, some other type of infection. They end up with pneumonia. They end up contracting something from somebody else. So then, more cost is incurred that way, just because their immune system might be lower or something like that. So, my grandparents both ended up with MRSA from being in the hospital. And initially that's, what caused them to both pass.
Well, I think there is something that we have to look at with this whole Medicare and Medicaid argument, and that is, if people who got on this, on these services, if they would set aside money for retirement, money so as they can pay their own health bills and all this, we wouldn't have to have Medicare and Medicaid work for everybody. I think the problem with a service like Medicare and Medicaid is it creates governmental dependence. And while on its own that might not necessarily be a bad thing if you are for socialism, the problem is now you have people relying on the government, and it's just another way for them to get you over the barrel. So I can understand if you are totally blind and you've tried looking for a job and you can't get a job, or if you're crippled and you can't get a job, some type of what the government calls a handicap or a disability. I can understand how services like Medicare and Medicaid would benefit them. And I can even understand how it would benefit senior citizens. But a lot of people get on welfare income so as they have access to all these free services. And I think that's where the problem comes in. And I think if a lot of these people who do that, as I stated at the beginning, would just save up and put forth the time and the effort and the energy to save some of that money, they, wouldn't need that program to be as stretched as it is now. You look at Social Security benefits, and there's people that are saying that Social Security is going downhill and Social Security is being robbed. Well, it's no wonder, because when the government does trades, they're in debt, so they're pulling money out of Social Security deposits. So it's all messed up right now, and we definitely need a reform of all this before it can actually work as intended.
I just want to address a couple things here from the answers provided. As far as saving up for retirement, I mean, most people probably do. Like my grandparents, for example, did, but they also received Medicare and Social Security. But those, like, Social Security is like an insurance, so when you get old enough and you qualify, then you get it. The same with Medicare. That's something that was paid for. But the idea that it's like broke or there's a problem or something like that as far as Medicare goes, or Social Security, sorry, the system was put into play to sort of zero out. That was the intent. So the money taken in was supposed to zero out at the end of the year, so equal, balanced. So during the 1980s, the Reagan administration, who also put in play the Medicare Part C, which is these donut hole is what they call it, Medicare Advantage, and D, that was put into play by Bush, which were basically like, they don't compete for costs or anything, they just charge whatever they want. So those are two big holes of money in the system. But when Reagan came about in the 80s, he foreseen this issue with less people putting into the system, because like it was mentioned in the original post, during the 50s and stuff, the baby boom, people had like a lot of kids, 5-7 kids weren't abnormal to have that many kids. So, later generations only have like 2 or 3 or something like that. So therefore, while they're working, they're putting in less money, because one family who would have essentially 7 or 5 workers putting in, now that same family only has 2 workers putting in. So you can kind of see the issue there. So he increased it, so now there's like a double tax.
I don't understand how Medicare creates some sort of culture of dependency or government dependency. Every pay period, 1.4% of your income, if you have a job and are paying taxes, goes into that system for Medicare. You do not get Medicare if you don't pay the Medicare tax, and if you don't pay the Medicare tax over a certain amount of time. You can't just pay it once and get Medicare. That's number one. Number two, you're not eligible to even use Medicare unless you're either disabled and you don't get the actual Medicare insurance until 2 years has gone by, or until you're 65 years old. And then when you have Medicare and you can use the Medicare insurance, you have to pay a premium every month. And the premium right now is about $110 or whatever it is. So I don't understand how that creates some sort of government dependence. It's something we pay for. It's not free. So let's take that Medicare argument about government dependency off the table. That is not relevant to the argument or to the debate. Medicaid, on the other hand, that's a different story. And for people to say, hey, why don't you save up? Why don't people just save up for health, to pay for health issues down the road? The people we're talking about who are even eligible for Medicaid are poor. It's a difference between eating, paying your rent, or paying for health insurance. Which would you choose? Starving, not having a home, or like a lot of people who are in their 20s and are, for the most part healthy, they don't pay for health insurance. That's why they have to be forced to pay for health insurance so that it is, able to maintain the system. So it is good for all. But getting back to what I was saying, when you're poor, you can't save. So to expect poor people with no money to save is kind of ridiculous. Save what? They have no money. Especially, let's address blind people with no job. What do they get? The ones on SSI right now. They get like $700 some odd a month. What are they saving exactly? What can they save? This talking point of the GOP and Fox News and the rest of them it's ridiculous. Okay, let's expand on this Medicaid thing for a little bit. What kind of people can get Medicaid? Poor people? Yes. Disabled people? Yes. Old people? Yes. Children? Yes. Can all poor people get Medicaid? No. Healthy men cannot get Medicaid. Healthy women with no children, unless they finagled getting welfare, which I highly doubt it, cannot get Medicaid. Can all disabled people get Medicaid? No. Because if they're working, number one, and they're earning over a certain threshold, they can't get Medicaid. If they're getting Social Security benefits or some sort of disabled benefits over a certain threshold, they can't get Medicaid. And let's be real, what is Medicaid really? It's health insurance that you don't have to pay a premium for. Okay? And it's not like just because they're not paying a premium, people are rushing to the doctor every day because they have that magic Medicaid card. I had Medicaid for about 11 years, all right? When I was receiving SSI before. I used it maybe 3 times. I think once for a checkup and twice to go to the dentist or some shit. I never used it. All right? So how did that exactly cost the system money? How did I cost the system, the Medicaid system, money if I never used the damn thing? And just because people have it and are eligible for it doesn't necessarily mean they use it all the time. So I don't understand how that engenders government dependency. All it means is you have a service that you're not paying for, taxpayers are paying for, and you're able to use. If anything, I would be looking at doctors more so when it comes to abuse of the Medicaid system. because they can charge anything to Medicaid, all right? They can claim such and such came in, and we ran a whole bunch of tests on them, and if the patient doesn't verify it, how does the Medicaid system know? All right? So if anything, instead of looking at the people who actually receive Medicaid, start looking at the doctors who are charging shit to Medicaid.
Yes, we should care about Medicare. We also should care about Medicaid, and we also should care about disability benefits, because that's our safety net. And what we should be doing, honestly, is getting rid of these so-called limits for disability, letting disabled people work who can actually work, and allowing them to keep their benefits untouched. Because let's say you get disabled on the job, then you're back where you started, but at least you have your disability benefits to fall back on. Whereas if a disabled person works and the benefits are taken away, then they get disabled on the job to where they will never be able to work again. It's going to be terrible for them to apply for benefits again. So you might as well let people with disabilities keep their benefits, because it's so tiny anyway. It's such a tiny amount. Let us keep our benefits.